Good morning. The first item of business today is general questions. Question number 1 from Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it's taking to ensure that social housing is affordable to tenants.
Minister Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government does not direct individual social landlords on setting rent levels for their tenancies. Individual social landlords are responsible for setting rents in consultation with their tenants. In doing so, they are required by the Scottish Social Housing Charter to strike a balance between the level of services provided, the cost of the services, and how far current and prospective tenants and service users can afford the rents. This means that each social landlord should be considering the ability of their current and future tenants to afford proposed increases in light of the tenant circumstances. On the issue of mitigating the UK Government's welfare reforms, this year we are spending around £50 million to mitigate the bedroom tax, helping over 70,000 households in the social sector in receipt of housing benefit or universal credit.
Ruth Maguire.
Presiding Officer, when I raised this matter last year, the Minister informed me that the Scottish Government would be working with social landlords in 2018 to understand how savings could be made within the affordable housing supply that could be reinvested towards keeping rents affordable. After a 6% increase last year, I have a constituent who has again seen his rent increase by 6% this year, with little or no improvements to his own home. This was not the increase consulted on by the Housing Association, but includes a further recalibration of rent structures. He told me that his rent has increased by 30% in the last 5 years. Does the Minister agree with me that action on the affordability of social housing for low-paid workers is urgent?
Minister, and could you also just adjust your microphone, Minister, towards you?
Certainly, Presiding Officer. As Ruth Maguire has noted, we as a government are taking an active interest in the issue of affordability. And for example, in the context of the Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan, and we're currently doing research on this very issue. The first progress report on child poverty to be published in the summer will set out the progress that we have made on this agenda to date. I know that social landlords understand the importance of keeping rents affordable and meeting the needs of the people they serve. They must get that balance right between the rent levels they set and the level of services that they provide, including the cost of services, as I've seen previously. They must not increase rents without regard to affordability. We'll continue to work with the sector to agree the best ways to keep rents affordable, for example, through improving procurement capability to deliver efficiencies. I'm more than willing to meet with Ms Maguire to discuss the issues around about this particular constituent, to make sure that the constituent has had a financial health check, to make sure that he is getting everything that he is entitled to, and beyond that to discuss the matters around about the Housing Association that she has talked about.
And Graham Simpson.
Thanks. Ruth Maguire has raised a really important issue here. But of course, one of the ways to keep rents down or to keep them in check would be to build more social housing. The government's committed to build 35,000 houses for social rent. Yet in the first 2 years of this Parliament, only 8,500, according to the government's own figures, were built, way off target. So can the Minister say how he hopes to get the programme back on track?
Minister.
First of all, Presiding Officer, in terms of rent affordability, here in Scotland in 2016-17, rents in housing associations were some 18% lower than in England, and 21% lower for local authority homes. So there's a big difference between SNP-run Scotland and Tory-run England in this regard. In terms of the housing programme, the housing programme is on track. We have said that we will deliver 50,000 affordable homes, 35,000 of those for social rent. We are on track to do so, and I'm sure that Mr Simpson knows that's the case because I pontificate about it quite a bit. So we will continue to deliver what is the biggest housing programme since the 1970s, unlike what is happening south of the border, where they do not seem to have the same ethos as us in terms of the delivery of social housing.
Question number 3, Liam Kerr.
the Scottish Government how many local authority providers in the North East provide 1,140 hours of funded childcare?
Minister Marie Todd.
Every 3- and 4-year-old and eligible 2-year-old is entitled to 1140 hours of funded early learning and childcare from August 2020. At the moment, legal entitlement is 600 hours. No local authority is under legal obligation to offer 1140 hours yet. Local authorities have been asked to phase in the expanded offer and to ensure that those children who stand to gain the most from extra funded hours are the first to benefit. So currently, 22 local authority settings in the North East, comprising Aberdeen City, Aberdeenshire, Angus, Dundee and Murray, are offering 1140 hours. A further 38 local authority settings in the North East will be phasing in and delivering the extended provision later this year.
Liam Kerr.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Presiding Officer, we're well over halfway point in the expansion of childcare provision to the 1,140 hours. And here I'm happy to help the Minister. In fact, in the North East, Freedom of Information requests have revealed only 8 out of 222 public childcare centres are offering the target of 1,140. That's 8 out of 222. So, to reassure parents who are feeling let down and show the Minister's confidence in the delivery of the target, will the Minister commit to resigning if she fails to deliver the 1,140 hours at every public childcare centre in the North East by 2020?
Minister.
So, to reassure the member again, I am absolutely confident that in 18 months' time, when the local authorities are legally obliged to deliver 1140 hours of free childcare, they will be. Let me assure you, we are on target and we are going to deliver this transformative programme. Let me reassure the member further, because the member restricted his question to local authority settings, as well as the local authority settings which are already providing 1140 hours. An estimated 77 partner providers are currently delivering the expanded entitlement of 1140 hours, and at least an additional 22 partner providers are expected to do so from August this year. If I were building a bridge, you would not expect to be driving over it 18 months before it was built.
Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and let's not forget that it's the Tories that are in charge of Aberdeenshire Council. Yeah. On Friday, I visited Hoodle's Nursery in Old Meldrum, one of many private partner provider nurseries gearing up for 1140 hours provision. Can I ask the Minister what she's doing to ensure that partner providers and childminders are included in the free childcare revolution, and that parents get to choose the best type of provision that suits them and their children?
Marie Todd.
Our provider-neutral funding follows the child approach will empower parents and carers to choose from a range of high-quality providers, including childminders and private and third sector settings. The power is well and truly in the parents' hands to choose the type of childcare that suits their child and their family best. And the provider just has to meet the national standard and have a place available. Our multi-year funding agreement will enable local authorities to pay sustainable rates to funded providers by 2020. We're committed to supporting providers in the transition to 2020. We know they'll be absolutely crucial to our success. Our delivery support plan builds on support already available, such as the 100% business rates relief, and sets out further actions to support providers. Meaningful partnership working between providers and local authorities is key to ensuring choice for parents and carers. The ELC Partnership Forum, established with COSLA, is helping to share good practice, and we're going to hold a partnership summit this summer as we approach 1 year to go.
And Willie Coffey.
Thank you. Can I ask the Minister what progress has been made by the local authorities to adjust payment frequencies to private, voluntary sector and home-based providers to encourage both local and national sustainability of the 1140 hours?
Minister.
A A key aspect of our funding follows the child approach to be introduced in August 2020, is that local authorities ensure that funded providers are paid promptly and efficiently for delivering the funded entitlement. That will support the sustainability of funded providers and ensure healthy cash flows. As a minimum, it's expected that local authorities should look to pay a funded provider within 30 days of the start of term, and preferably much sooner. The timing of the payment should be stipulated in the agreement between the local authority and the funded provider, or in the general conditions governing terms of business. There are already examples of local authorities with prompt payment practices, and as I said, we're encouraging the sharing of good practice through the Knowledge Hub.
Question number 4, Jamie Greene.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to reduce air pollution in North Ayrshire.
Cabinet Secretary Rosanna Cunningham.
The Scottish Government works closely with all local authorities in Scotland on reducing air pollution. Financial and other support is provided to authorities to assist them with monitoring and where necessary actions to improve air quality. And the Cleaner Air for Scotland strategy sets out a series of actions for Government, Transport Scotland, local authorities and others to further reduce air pollution across all areas of Scotland. An independent review of the strategy is currently ongoing.
Jamie Greene.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, but clearly one of the main drivers of reducing air pollution in towns across North Ayrshire and right across Scotland will be improving the uptake of low-emission vehicles. So on that point, can I ask the Cabinet Secretary how many charging points has this government installed in North Ayrshire? If that information is not available in the Chamber now, I'd be happy to have it in writing later. And how confident is she that the government is going to meet its 2032 target, given that new car sales of low-emission vehicles is only 6% at the moment?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think the member knows that probably is a question which ought to be directed towards my transport colleagues. However, I can advise him that action is being taken in this regard in North Ayrshire, and there are currently 12 electric vehicle charge points in place, with 6 further vehicle charge points being installed. So I think he should be reassured that the work on vehicle charge points is ongoing, and at the end of the day, low-emission vehicle uptake is a matter for all aspects of society. It's not something government can absolutely direct, and I hope that he will join me in encouraging all car owners, when they're thinking about new purchases, to consider low-emission vehicles as a purchase.
And Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Minister tell us how air quality and indeed air quality targets in Scotland compare to those in the rest of the UK?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, they compare particularly favourably, as you might imagine. There's a particular target which Scotland is the first country in Europe to have adopted in terms of legislating, and that's the fine particulate target, and that of course is the one that gives us the biggest concern in respect of the impacts on health of air pollution. We compare well with the rest of the UK, and we're fully compliant with EU requirements for fine particulate matter.
Question number 5, Annabelle Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the operation of the Town Centre Fund.
Cabinet Secretary Derek Mackay.
The £50 million Town Centre Fund, which I announced in the budget, has been developed in partnership with COSLA and was launched on the 1st of March. The fund will be distributed across all local authorities to enable them to stimulate and support a wide range of investments which encourage town centres and city neighbourhoods to diversify and flourish. The distribution of the fund was agreed jointly by Scottish Government and COSLA leaders. It will be for local authorities to allocate this fund against the themes of the Town Centre Action Plan.
Annabelle Ewing.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer, and I also thank him warmly for allocating the highest amount of funding, in fact, under the Fund to Fife Council, some £4.3 million. But as the MSP for Cowdenbeath constituency, can the Cabinet Secretary clarify how I can ensure that towns in my constituency get their fair share of this very welcome Scottish Government funding?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I, first of all, welcome the warm welcome from Annabelle Ewing of these resources. I think they will be transformative for our town centres. The exact figure for Fife, to be precise, is £4,335,000. It will be for local authorities to determine the distribution, but the campaign to ensure that there is fairness for every part of the constituency that Annabelle Ewing represents, I think, has already begun, and the Council will be very well aware of that position, but it will be a matter for them to determine the distribution of that fund.
Thank you. Question number 6, Claire Baker.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to deal with asbestos-related illnesses and how it supports people with these conditions.
Minister Joe Fitzpatrick.
The Scottish Government expects NHS boards to provide high-quality, person-centred care for all people, including those with suspected or confirmed diagnosis of asbestos-related conditions. The Scottish Government's cancer strategy, Beating Cancer, Ambition and Action, was launched in March 2016 alongside a commitment to spend £100 million over 5 years to improve the prevention, detection, diagnosis, treatment and aftercare of those affected by all forms of cancer, and that of course includes those who have an asbestos-related cancer.
Claire Baker.
I thank the Minister for the answer. Presiding Officer, today I am hosting Tayside Asbestos Action Group in Parliament, and I know from personal experience how much support they give to people living with asbestos-related conditions, including mesothelioma, and their families, and I thank them for their work. There remains concern that a postcode lottery exists when it comes to people receiving the medical or pastoral care they need and deserve. What is the Scottish Government doing to bridge the gaps in provision and raise awareness among health and social workers of the soft support which is available and the importance of signposting people to these vital services?
Minister. Thank the member for that question and recognise her personal commitment to this area of work, and also recognise the work of Tayside Action Against Asbestos. I think the member makes a really important point. So we've recently published a revised Scottish referral guideline for suspected cancer on the 22nd of January. So the purpose of that is to make sure that we have that consistency. So the referral guidelines for suspected cancer will help ensure clinicians have access to the most up-to-date evidence to refer patients with symptoms suspicious of cancer onto the right pathway at the right time. But I absolutely recognise the work of organisations such as those in the gallery, and happy to continue working with the member on an issue that I know is of personal importance to her.
And question number 7, Jenny Mara.
To ask the Scottish Government when it will put together an economic plan for Dundee.
Cabinet Secretary Derek Mackay.
We have a national economic strategy and action plan which we are delivering for Scotland, and we're working with local and regional partners to help build the kind of long-term, resilient and inclusive economic growth that Dundee needs in order to thrive.
Jenny Mara.
Presiding Officer, Dundee has lost 850 jobs at Michelin, over 200 just in the city at McGill. We'll lose over 300 at HMRC on top of the many smaller businesses that have closed. On Monday, Forth and Tay decommissioning will launch, but we have still to see the jobs materialise, and I note that there is to be no government presence at this event. I believe this government has a responsibility to its voters in Dundee to urgently prioritise our city for new economic opportunities. Will the Cabinet Secretary publish a Dundee jobs plan this autumn, and can he please commit to that today?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we do have an economic strategy, we have an economic action plan, and that's what this government's about, delivering the actions necessary to grow our economy and create jobs across Scotland. But specifically for Dundee, as Jenny Mara knows very well, when Michelin took the decision to leave Scotland, I got involved and sure we recalibrated entire efforts to ensure that Michelin stays in Dundee, and that's what they committed to do because of the actions of this government and our partners, and that was significant. In relation to some of the public sector jobs that Jenny Mara has spoken about, HMRC pulling out of Dundee, was it not the Labour Party that joined with the Conservatives to say that to save civil service jobs, people had to vote against Scottish independence, and still we're losing those jobs as part of the union? On the other hand, the Scottish Government is delivering 750 new jobs for Dundee through the creation of the Social Security Agency. Further actions for Dundee. There has been industrial difficulties. Our agencies have got involved to try and support the Dundee economy. We'll continue to do so, but with the Scottish Government, Dundee gets action. From the Labour Party, they get empty rhetoric.
Question 8, Richard Lyle.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it's taken to encourage companies to establish more apprenticeships.
Minister Jamie Hepburn.
We encourage companies to provide apprenticeship opportunities, of which there will be 29,000 next year, up from 28,000 this year, through a variety of means such as promotional activity in Scottish Apprenticeship Week, through developing the Young Workforce Regional Groups, an activity undertaken by the Scottish Apprenticeship Advisory Board. Skills Development Scotland also undertake a range of promotional activity, selling the benefits of apprenticeships to employers and individuals.
Richard Lyle.
Can I compliment the Minister for his drive in more modern apprentices, and I note that the new target has been set by the Scottish Government for next year of over 29,000. Last week I visited Saltire Heating Systems in Belsill. They're taking on apprentices, have 30 apprentices, nearly 12% of the workforce. I hope other firms will take their lead. As people retire, we need more apprentices to take up the slack right across the range for every company, from drivers to plumbers to bricklayers. So my question to the Minister is, what steps can the Scottish Government take to ensure that we have the correct range of apprentices, both male and female, that Scotland requires to meet our future needs to grow as a country?
Jamie Hepburn.
Can I begin by congratulating Saltire Heating Systems for making exactly the type of contribution we need to see employers make. We will continue to undertake the activity we do, Presiding Officer, increasing the number of apprenticeship opportunities, but also ensuring that our system is responsive to employer need. That's exactly the system we have in bed now. We'll continue to engage with employers to ensure our apprenticeship offer responds to the needs of our economy and society. Mr Lyle can be assured of that, as can every member in this chamber.
Thank you very much. And before we turn to First Minister's questions, could I invite colleagues to join me in welcoming to our gallery the Honourable Ted Arnott, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly of Ontario. Thank you. We turn to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Jackson Carlisle.
Those calling for the Prime Minister's deal to be supported included the National Farmers Union of Scotland, the Scottish Chambers of Commerce, the Scotch Whisky Association, the Scottish Fishermen's Federation and the CBI. First Minister, are they traitors too?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, the Prime Minister's deal is a bad deal for the UK and certainly a bad deal for Scotland. Let me just recap. It would take Scotland out of the EU against our will, out of the single market, out of the customs union, with no clarity about the future relationship with the EU. I don't think any MP with the best interests of Scotland at heart should vote for that proposition. But I would say gently to Jackson Carlisle, even if every single SNP MP had voted for the deal earlier in the week, it would still have been heavily defeated because the Prime Minister failed to persuade so many in her own side. Indeed, she's failing to persuade those in her own cabinet. But Jackson Carlisle mentions the National Farmers Union. Here's what they said yesterday about the tariff schedule that was published by the UK Government. They said that it undermines the food security of the UK. What an appalling set of circumstances. And of course, they also wrote to every Scottish MP urging them to take no deal off the table. So perhaps Jackson Carlisle would like to explain to the Chamber and to the public today why, with just one exception, and I'm not talking about David Mundell, with one exception, none of the Scottish Tory MPs voted last night in the House of Commons to take no deal off the table. That is what was utterly shameful, and perhaps Jackson Carlisle would care to explain it.
Jackson Carlisle.
Presiding Officer, on Tuesday of this week, the SNP Cabinet Secretary Michael Russell, sitting just next to her, accused those who backed the Prime Minister's deal as being traitors to Scotland. As ever, he thought he was being clever. He hid the accusation behind a hashtag, but that's the charge he made. Surely the First Minister will disassociate herself from this inflammatory smear, and it's telling that she is not. But there is an important point here. There are many of us in Scotland, in politics and outside, who do back the Prime Minister's deal. Yeah. Will the First Minister at least accept that we think it is what's best for our country, and we do so in all good faith?
First Minister.
Do you know, I genuinely am struggling to believe that Jackson Carlisle is coming here to talk about a Twitter hashtag. Yes. When the government led by his party is in meltdown, is a shambles, and is taking this country ever closer to the cliff edge. On the question of the historical Ragman Row, however, he might be interested to know Robert the Bruce actually signed it. If David Mundell ever wants to get any of the spirit of Robert the Bruce, then I'm sure all of us would warmly welcome that. But the fact of the matter is, Presiding Officer, with the exception of Paul Masterton, the honourable exception of Paul Masterton, every single Scottish Conservative MP has chosen to put loyalty to the Prime Minister ahead of the interests of the Scottish people. I'm afraid that is a fact, and I'll give Jackson Carlisle another opportunity to explain why all of them refused, with one exception last night, to vote to take no deal off the table. Businesses like the one I was visiting in Glasgow yesterday, the Farmers' Union, interests the length and breadth of the country, wanted all Scotland's MPs to take no deal off the table. Why did Scottish Tories refuse to do that?
Jackson Carlisle.
Presiding Officer, I'm asking her to enhance the dignity of her office. She's chosen not to do so. Presiding Officer, many joined the business organisations I mentioned in backing the deal earlier this week because we believe it is a good deal which offers certainty for business in the country. I respect the views of those who disagree, but they now have a duty to spell out their alternative way forward. The First Minister's preference is to support a second UK Brexit referendum, but it begs so many more questions. What would be the options? When Leave or Remain wins this time, shall we make it best of three? How would this delay guarantee people and businesses the certainty they need and which the First Minister talked about last night? And would she accept the result? Or is all of this, as many of us suspect, just a prelude to yet another referendum, the one she really wants?
First Minister.
Well, I think the result of the 2016 Brexit referendum in Scotland should have been accepted because Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain in the European Union. Can I remind him again, though, and this is where Jackson Carlisle, or one of the many areas where Jackson Carlisle is really struggling here, not surprisingly, given the mess the Tories are making, not just of Brexit, but of the entire UK right now. If every single SNP MP had voted for the Prime Minister's deal on Tuesday night, it would still have gone down to a heavy defeat because she has not managed to persuade those in her own party, let alone anyone else. And in terms of spelling out a way forward, I spent 2 years, more than 2 years, suggesting compromise to the Prime Minister. Single market, customs union, compromise. That was cast aside, ignored and dismissed, as every vote in this Parliament on the issue has been cast aside, ignored and dismissed by the Tory government. But the way forward now, yes, is to put this issue back to the people. Parliament has failed to resolve this issue. And if Parliament can't decide, the people should. So that's what I think is the way forward, and it's a better way forward than the Prime Minister trying to bully the House of Commons into accepting a bad deal. She should accept defeat, change course and open her mind now to the right way forward.
Jackson Carlisle.
Not that this First Minister has ever sought to bully this Parliament when they've been defeated on issues. But we have accepted the result of all referendums. The First Minister has accepted the result of none. The blunt truth is the First Minister will only accept the result of a referendum, anyone, if it goes her way. I back a deal that gives our fishing communities the sea of opportunity they want, a deal supported by our whisky industry, giving them frictionless trade across the continent, a deal that our farmers say will ensure there are no hard barriers to our biggest market. All these Scottish organisations, and many all across Scotland, are telling us to back the deal and get this done. Isn't it time to respect the result, back an orderly Brexit? The whole country gets a chance then to move on.
First Minister.
I do respect the outcome of the 2016 referendum. Scotland voted to remain in the EU. That is the best outcome for Scotland. And if the Tories, for once in their life, could ever find it within themselves to stand up for Scotland rather than standing up for a beleaguered Prime Minister, then they would also recognise it's the best future for Scotland. Frankly, it is deluded for anyone to suggest that there is majority support across Scotland for the Prime Minister's deal. There is not support for leaving the EU. There is certainly not support for leaving on the basis of such a profoundly bad deal. The Prime Minister's deal has been defeated overwhelmingly in the House of Commons, not just once but twice. It is time for her to accept that defeat and open her mind now to an alternative way forward. Let's get no deal properly off the table. Let's seek a lengthy extension to allow this issue to go back to the people. If the Conservatives were listening, not to their bosses in Westminster, but if they were listening to majority opinion across Scotland, that's exactly what the Conservatives would be arguing for. And I think it is to their great discredit that they are failing to do that they are indeed failing Scotland.
Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Presiding Officer, last night the House of Commons voted to oppose a no-deal Brexit. But as the law stands, we will still be leaving the European Union on the 29th of March with no deal. The First Minister and I agree that no deal would be a disaster. 2 years of Theresa May claiming that no deal is better than a bad deal is nothing less than a lie. Does the First Minister agree with me that despite last night's vote, no deal remains an immediate and a very real danger?
Be careful about the language, Mr Leonard. First Minister.
Yes, I do. Richard Leonard is right to point out that notwithstanding the vote in the House of Commons last night, the legal default is no deal on the 29th of March, which is why I think the Government should be coming forward now with a proposition to change the law so that the UK does not crash out of the EU on the 29th of March with no deal, and I hope he would support that proposition. But I also think it's important for those who oppose the Prime Minister's deal, for those of us, which I think includes Richard Leonard, who oppose Brexit, to come together now to find a better way forward. And I say to him, I hope in a constructive spirit, that, and ask him if he can use his influence with Jeremy Corbyn to get Jeremy Corbyn firmly behind the option of a second EU referendum, because if he would come off the fence, then I think that option would become not just the best one, but the most likely next step. So will he, perhaps this afternoon, get on the phone to Jeremy Corbyn and ask him to, at long last on the issue of Brexit, start showing some leadership?
Mr Leonard, can I just ask you, Mr Leonard, can I just ask you not to use the term lie, even about people outside, or particularly about people outside this chamber? Mr Leonard.
Okay. Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I just remind the Chamber that last week in this Parliament, all parties voted to reject no deal in all circumstances, with the sole exception of the Tories. What does it say about the Tories in here that every single one of them, without exception, voted for something that neither the Secretary of State for Scotland nor Jackson Carlo's own MP could support last night?
Absolutely.
But the reality is this: without a majority in the Commons for an alternative, no deal remains a threat. So does the First Minister agree with me that tonight members of Parliament must vote for Article 50 to be extended long enough to allow for a majority in Parliament to be formed in favour of a different approach?
First Minister.
Yes, and SNP MPs have been laying amendments to that effect and will vote for exactly that. In fact, I think it is time for the House of Commons to take control of this out of the hands of the Prime Minister and the Government and to make sure that a sensible way forward is found. I agree wholeheartedly with Richard Leonard about the Scottish Conservatives. He's right to say this Parliament voted overwhelmingly to reject no deal last week, and this Parliament again is being ignored, not just by the Government but by Scottish Tory MPs. I think it is to his credit that Paul Masterton did the right thing last night. The Secretary of State for Scotland, though, can't even manage to rebel properly. He pathetically opted for an abstention to save his own job rather than properly standing up for this country, and that, I think, is a disgrace. But on the issue of the way forward, I say again to Richard Leonard, because I think we probably agree on more than we disagree on this issue, but Jeremy Corbyn surely has to start showing real leadership here, because it is, even at this stage, not entirely clear to me what would be different about the situation the UK is in just now if Jeremy Corbyn was leading the Brexit negotiations rather than Theresa May. The way to break the parliamentary deadlock is to put this issue back to the people. So I hope Richard Leonard will seek to persuade his leader that that is the option that should be backed, and then we can build a majority around that and find a better, the right way forward, not just for Scotland but for the whole of the UK.
Richard Leonard.
Well, Jeremy Corbyn's made it clear that the House of Commons has got two options. It's got the option of securing a better deal or taking it back to the people. That's the Labour Party position. We know that the House of Commons does not want two things. It does not want no deal, and it does not want Theresa May's deal. But the Prime Minister still isn't listening, and she says that she wants to bring back her deal back for a third time, even though the deal is dead. Does the First Minister agree with me that the Prime Minister cannot keep asking the same question until she gets the answer that she wants?
First Minister.
Yes, I agree with that. One of the favourite catchphrases of the Tories is we said no and we mean it. Perhaps they should start applying it to the Prime Minister and the Government in London. But I'd say to Richard Leonard about the two options he says the House of Commons has, one of which, according to him, is a better deal. There is no good Brexit deal. A Labour Brexit will not be better or less damaging to Scotland than a Tory Brexit. It is Brexit that will do the damage to Scotland, and that is why we should be seeking to honour the vote of the Scottish people and reverse Brexit if we possibly can. So I hope we will be able to put a majority behind a second EU referendum so that people, not just in Scotland but across the UK, knowing everything that is now known about Brexit, can take that opportunity to keep the UK and to keep Scotland where it belongs, which is within the European Union.
Yeah. We have some constituency supplementaries. The first from Tavish Scott, to be followed by Bob Doris.
Presiding Officer, the internationally recognised Fair Isle Bird Observatory was destroyed by fire last weekend. Thankfully, no one was injured, despite the valiant efforts of firefighters from across Shetland and the Fair Isle team led by Fiona Mitchell. The home that is David and Susanna Parnaby's was completely destroyed. Would the First Minister accept that Fair Isle is the kind of island that gets on and wants to move forward, and their intention is to rebuild the observatory? And will her government please provide every assistance towards that? Will she also ensure that lessons are learned from the Fair Isle fire for the emergency services in supporting fires in islands where there is no full-time fire cover? And finally, would you recognise that 3 out of the 9 local firefighting team are French? These brave women are having to apply to stay in Fair Isle because of the omnishambles that is Brexit.
First Minister.
Well, on that last point, before I come on to the substantive issue, I agree wholeheartedly with Tavish Scott. It is outrageous, in my view, that any EU national who has made Scotland, any part of Scotland, their home is having to apply for the right to stay here. But the circumstances that he has outlined, I think, underlines just how shameful that situation is. More generally, Presiding Officer, can I thank Tavish Scott for raising this issue and say that my thoughts are very much with all those connected with the Fair Isle Bird Observatory Trust at this very, very sad time, particularly the Warden's family, who, of course, sadly lost their home in the fire. As Tavish Scott said, we must be thankful, of course, that there were no casualties. Incidents like this remind us of the bravery and professionalism of our firefighters. I note Tavish Scott's point, and we will reflect on the point about the island with no full-time fire cover. But this was a good example of an effective multi-agency response, and the Coast Guard, Shetland Isles Council were both assisting firefighters in reaching the scene. Obviously, investigations into the cause of the fire are underway, and we must await the outcome of those inquiries, and thankfully the wealth of bird census data collected since 1948 are digitised and backed up safely. Lastly, Presiding Officer, I want to acknowledge the efforts of the Fair Isle community, who I understand have raised almost £20,000 in crowdfunding support for the Warden's family to help them get back on their feet. But let me give an assurance to Tavish Scott and to his constituents today that the Scottish Government stands ready to do anything we reasonably can to help in this very tragic situation.
Bob Doris, to be followed by Mark Ruskell.
Presiding Officer, my constituents, the Dallas family, have had their appeal for asylum refused. I understand they fled to the UK in December 2017 after Mrs Dallas escaped a gun attack in Karachi, fuelled by a fatwa against her because she simply could not agree to convert from Christianity to Islam. It would appear that the Home Office may place an undue weight on local police reports in making such determinations. Does the First Minister share the concern of the European Centre for Law and Justice over police torture in Pakistan of Christians, something that makes victims nervous of reporting incidents such as in this case? And would the Scottish Government make representations to the UK Home Office asking for them to take into account such concerns when cases such as the Dallas family are being considered?
First Minister.
Well, I thank Bob Doris for raising this issue. Firstly, yes, I do share the concern of the European Centre for Law and Justice. I strongly condemn, as I'm sure everybody in the Chamber does, any persecution of people from minority communities. Nobody should ever feel at risk because of their faith or beliefs. The Scottish Government will always seek to champion human rights, and we strongly support international processes such as UN scrutiny of individual member states. Of course, sadly, asylum is a matter reserved to the UK Government and handled by the Home Office, but the Scottish Government has consistently urged the Home Office to adopt fair and humane asylum policies and to ensure that full account is taken of all of the individual circumstances in every case, and we will continue to do that. And if there is any assistance we can offer to the Dallas family, then we'd be happy to discuss that with Bob Doris.
Mark Ruskell, to be followed by Donald Cameron.
Presiding Officer, I've been inundated this week with messages from constituents who are quite frankly disgusted, absolutely disgusted at the images appearing on social media of a fox being ripped apart by the dogs of the Fife fox hunt last weekend. So can I ask the First Minister a very simple question? Should dogs ever be used to hunt a fox?
First Minister.
I can absolutely understand the distress that people feel at the images that Mark Ruskell has referred to. I share that feeling. As Mark Ruskell knows, the Government has announced proposals, brought forward proposals following Lord Bonamy's review for further restrictions around fox hunting, and those proposals now, I think, will rightly be debated by Parliament. And I know that Mark Ruskell and others, including many on my own benches here who feel very, very strongly about this issue, will make sure that they make their views known as these proposals go through Parliament. I think that's now the right way for Parliament to proceed, and I look forward to the debates that will follow.
Donald Cameron.
Thank you. The First Minister will be aware of the tragic loss of life on Ben Nevis earlier this week in one of the worst climbing accidents in recent history. Will the First Minister join me in expressing condolences to the family of those who died, and also in paying tribute to the volunteers of Lochaber and Glencoe mountain rescue teams and the Coast Guard, who worked so courageously in atrocious conditions to rescue the casualties?
First Minister.
Can I thank Donald Cameron for raising this issue. I, of course, join with him in conveying my deepest condolences to the bereaved, to those injured, and also, of course, to express my deep gratitude, echoed, I'm sure, across the whole chamber, to our emergency services, to those in our mountain rescue teams, to the Coast Guard, to all of those people who put their own lives on the line trying to rescue people who get into trouble on our mountains. It's hard to adequately express the depth of gratitude that I think all of us owe to these people. This tragic event, and it is a deeply tragic event, is a reminder of no matter the joy and the beauty of our mountains and our landscape, they can also be dangerous places, and that has to be taken into account at all times. But for now, my condolences go particularly to the bereaved, and yes, my grateful thanks go to all those who took part in the rescue.
Thank you. Question number 3, Willie Rennie.
The SNP government passed a law that bans sending biodegradable waste to landfill by 2021. But according to an astonishing report by the Office of Budget Responsibility published yesterday, the Scottish Government has admitted that it can only meet this legal deadline by dumping the waste in England. Is this environmentally responsible?
First Minister.
I'm not sure I would agree with Willie Rennie's characterisation of this. We I think had an exchange, not him and I, him and me and someone else had an exchange on this last week or the week before. We are committed to the 2021 target. Some councils already have plans in place to meet that. Other councils require greater work, and we are working with councils to responsibly and appropriately deal with waste, which is, I think, what everybody would expect us to do. I'd be very happy to ask the Environment Secretary to discuss further with Willie Rennie the precise plans that require to be in place so that all of us can get behind and see this target met.
Willie Rennie.
I think she should check out the OBR report, because it's all very clear within there. This government is making a bit of a habit of breaking its own laws. The SNP NHS waiting times law has been broken for 190,000 patients. The SNP class sizes law has been broken for 4,500 children. And now we find the SNP government is about to break its own law on waste. The First Minister is right to be appalled by the chaotic Conservative government over Brexit. But her smugness about the incompetence of the Conservative government cannot hide our incompetence in our own backyard. Law after law broken by this failing government. What sums up our government best? Thousands of pupils overcrowded, hundreds of thousands of patients waiting, or 1 million tonnes of rubbish.
I can just urge all colleagues, just try to be more respectful and not personal in their questions. First Minister.
I think that ship has sailed with Willie Rennie, Presiding Officer, but keep trying. On the issue of landfill, I mean, I would say to Willie Rennie, it's hard to understand how we could stand here accused of breaking a law, as he puts it, that's not due to even be enforced until 2021. We are working towards delivery of that with our local authority partners. It's a very important objective, it's an important responsibility, it's difficult and complex, as many things are, but we will continue to work with our local authority partners because it is the right thing to do. In terms of waiting times in the NHS, the Health Secretary recently, of course, has published the waiting times reduction plan. We were investing £850 million to make sure that waiting times are reduced in the areas where there is significant pressure. Pressure, of course, coming from an ageing population and greater demand on our National Health Service. And, of course, in education, which I think he also mentioned, we see more teachers in our schools now. There are more teachers in our primary schools now than at any stage since I was at primary school in 1980. There are, I think, 1,200 more teachers in our school since I became First Minister. So we, unlike the UK government that has completely ceased to govern in any meaningful sense, we're getting on with the important issues in our environment, in our health service, in our education system, and that's exactly what we will continue to do.
Some further supplementaries. The first from Maureen Watt, followed by Graham Simpson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of the devastating floods which have hit many parts of Malawi in recent days, resulting in 45 deaths, 577 injuries, at least 2 missing people. 150,000 households have been affected, or 750,000 of the population. Over 15,000 households have been totally destroyed, resulting in 187 camps being established throughout the country. A horrifying situation, I'm sure you will agree. Given Scotland's, this Parliament and the Government's very close links with Malawi, what can the Scottish Government do to help the people of Malawi at this dreadful time?
First Minister.
Well, can I thank Maureen Watt for raising this issue, and my condolences go to all those who have been affected by this disaster in Malawi. Our thoughts are with the people of Malawi at what is an incredibly difficult time for them. I am pleased to tell the Chamber today that we have just announced the provision of £175,000 to support efforts to ensure safe water supplies in southern Malawi. Funding will be provided through the Climate Justice Fund and delivered by our Hydro Nation partners, who are of course already working on the ground in southern Malawi to secure water resources affected by the floods. Scottish Government officials will also work closely with partners on the ground to support the relief efforts. Scotland, of course, as Maureen Watt has alluded to, has a historic relationship with Malawi going back 150 years. They are our friends. We do a great deal of work in and for Malawi. We benefit a lot ourselves from that work with Malawi. So we stand with them at this difficult time and will do everything possible to help.
Graham Simpson.
Following the pay deal with teachers, I and some other MSPs were contacted by a serving police officer from East Kilbride last week, and he wrote this: "Whilst I appreciate that teachers have worked hard and do deserve a pay rise, why is it that NHS staff were given 9% and police officers only 6.5%? Does the Scottish Government place the value of police officers as only half?" These are the words of a serving police officer. Does the Scottish Government place the value of police officers as only half that of school teachers? Is it that the Government know that because police officers cannot strike or take any real industrial action, that they are an easy target? What would the First Minister say to that police officer and thousands of others?
First Minister.
Well, I think parts of those comments were quite disgraceful, actually. I value all public sector workers and I thank them for the work that they do. On the police pay award, that is the best award for police officers anywhere in the UK. The Scottish Police Federation described it as the best pay award in 20 years. And if the member thinks 6.5% is not good enough, I would love to pay all of our public sector workers even more than we are. But if he thinks that's not good enough, then I wonder what he makes of the 2% that have been awarded to police officers in England by his Tory colleagues in the Westminster government. I think described by the head of the Met as a punch in the nose for police officers. In terms of our NHS workers, many NHS workers, of course, get higher pay in Scotland than they do in England because of the value we attach to the work that they do. And in terms of teachers, they have now been offered, they were previously offered a very good pay deal. They have now been offered an exceptionally good pay deal. I think that is a recognition of the good work that they do. I hope that is now accepted. But I value all public sector workers. And I think if you look at any group of public sector workers, you will find that the value attached to them by the Scottish Government is much, much greater than the value attached to their counterparts in England by the Tory Government at Westminster.
Question number 4, Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the Spring Statement.
First Minister.
Well, the Spring Statement underlines, again, the chaos at the heart of the UK Government. It showed that the Chancellor has billions of pounds available that he could be investing in public services, but has instead had to set aside to pay for the self-inflicted mess that is Brexit. The UK Government's chaotic approach to Brexit is already undermining the economy. The OBR forecasts the UK growth will slow and that in both 2018 and 2019, business investment will contract. That would represent the weakest period of business investment since the 2008 financial crisis. That, quite bluntly, is the cost of the UK Government's economic mismanagement, and sadly there's no sign that they are about to change course, or at least no sign that they are voluntarily about to change course.
Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Would the First Minister agree with me, however, that we should welcome the Chancellor's recognition of the strategic importance of Edinburgh University and the requirement to invest in the borderlands? However, does the First Minister also share my deep disappointment that the Chancellor failed to take the opportunity to guarantee all EU funding to Scotland worth over £5 billion in the current EU budget round will be replaced in full, or indeed to announce any amount of funding whatsoever? Simply not good enough from this Tory UK Chancellor.
First Minister.
Well, firstly, can I agree with Bruce Crawford's comments about Edinburgh University and obviously also the borderlands? The Scottish Government confirmed, of course, yesterday that we will invest up to £85 million in the Borderlands growth deal over the next 10 years. But it is deeply disappointing that the UK Government has yet to provide any clarity on future arrangements for EU funding. Proposals in agriculture, fisheries and structural funding are vague and they provide no certainty for the future. The position on the proposed shared prosperity fund is particularly concerning, with no sign of the consultation that was promised in autumn of last year, nor any meaningful engagement with the devolved administrations on this matter. It is crucial that the UK Government urgently commits to replacing all funding streams in full and that we receive our fair share of this to ensure that decisions can be taken in the best interest of Scotland. Funding decisions currently being made by Scottish ministers should continue to be made by Scottish ministers.
Rachel Hamilton, to be followed by James Kelly.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the First Minister has just said, yesterday's spring statement set out funding of £260 million from the UK Government and £85 million from the Scottish Government for the Borderlands Growth Deal, delivering a manifesto commitment from the Scottish Conservatives. This deal shows what can be achieved when both of Scotland's governments work together. First Minister, cross-border links with the south of Scotland and the north of England are integral and must be enhanced to promote inclusive growth. With that in mind, does she agree that an extension of the Borders Railway from Tweed to Carlisle would bring transformational change to that area?
First Minister.
Well, I actually want to come on to substantively agree with the sentiments of the question, but I do feel obliged to, I suppose, inject a bit of a clarification into the figures that were used at the start of the question. The member said that the UK Government had confirmed it was investing up to £260 million in the Borderlands deal compared to the £85 million from the Scottish Government. That is true, but I think it's important to point out that of the UK Government's £260 million, only £65 million of that is for the Scottish side. The rest of it is for England. So it just puts us slightly... But nevertheless, by the very nature of Borderlands, it is important that the investment is on both sides. I am a long-standing supporter of the Borderlands work and the Borderlands growth deal. What the member says about the Borders Railway, I also have a lot of sympathy with, which is why, of course, the Government has been doing feasibility work around that. So we will continue to support this initiative, and I'm glad to see yesterday that the UK Government is prepared to support it as well.
James Kelly.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The recent SNP Green budget resulted in councils being forced to make cuts and pass them on to local communities. So we have job cuts in Dundee, the ending of support to the Citizens Advice Bureau in Clackmannanshire, and the axing of free school bus travel in Moray. Can I ask the First Minister,
Order, please,
if any Barnett consequentials are available from yesterday's spring statement, will they be allocated to local councils who have had to inflict pain on local communities?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, on the issue of Barnett consequentials, we have no clarity yet on whether there are any Barnett consequentials or what the amount of any Barnett consequentials would be. And when we do know that, of course, we'll share that information with Parliament. James Kelly talks about budget decisions. I have to say that I thought the decision of the Labour group yesterday to vote against an increase in the carers supplement was absolutely and utterly shameful. The only ones, as I understand it, in the Parliament that did that. More broadly on local government funding, as he well knows, the budget for local government has increased and that is a positive thing. We do not pretend that life is easy for local councils in the current climate, but if James Kelly is as concerned as he claims to be about the budgets of local government or any other part of the public sector or about cuts or anything like that, then isn't it about time that he started to direct some of that anger at the Tory government, who are the architects of these cuts? Can I remind him that the budget of the Scottish Government between 2010 and the end of this decade will be cut by £1.9 billion in real terms? That's the reality, and frankly, that is the consequence we're living with as a result of his partnership with the Better Together Tory partners in the 2014 referendum.
Question number 5, Michelle Ballantyne.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what steps the Scottish Government is taking to ensure that people are financially ready for their retirement.
First Minister.
Matters relating to pensions, unfortunately, remain reserved to the UK Government. However, we are committed to doing what we can within our current powers to ensure people are financially ready for retirement. We support the development of a labour market that offers good quality and rewarding jobs for everyone, no matter their age. We're also supporting older people through our financial health check service, which offers free advice to help older people maximise their incomes. And we do this in the face of continuing attacks from the Tory government on people reaching retirement age, such as the scandal that thousands of WASPy women are facing, with delays in getting their pensions, and the disgraceful cuts to pension credit for mixed-age couples. So I don't know what Michelle Ballantyne's follow-up question is going to be, but let me warn her, I will take no lectures from the Tories on pensions.
Michelle Ballantyne.
Well, given that I was asking a question and not lecturing, I think that's quite a sad response. However, I am heartened to hear that you are trying to do things for older people who are nearing retirement. But what I'm actually wanting to ask is, I've found in my conversations with younger people that most have only a very basic understanding of how their pension works or how to contribute to it during their lives. Back in 2015, there was some action down south of actually creating teaching materials to explain financial planning to youngsters, following Minister Steve Webb's research that found teenagers had an expectation of a state pension that stretched from between £800 per week to £9 per week. So could the First Minister tell me if any steps are being taken by the Scottish Government to educate school pupils around importance of their pension and learning within the curriculum?
First Minister.
Well, you know, it's actually a reasonable question, to be fair, and I covered in some of my original answer the work we're doing to make sure that people are financially ready for retirement, and I think it is a reasonable proposition that we should also be looking at how we educate young people. Of course, this is a reserved matter, but we will take our responsibility to ensure we're contributing to it. But can I say to Michelle Ballantyne, and I'm going to say this seriously, and I would ask her to reflect on it, if we are going to say that we need to educate young people more to save for their retirement, we should wonder what example it sets to young people when over 2 million women paid their national insurance contributions in full in the expectation that they would receive their state pension at a certain age, only for that pension entitlement to be robbed from them by the UK Government. So if we want to encourage young people to save for their retirement and convince them that it's worth doing so, then we have to start treating our current pensioners with more dignity and respect than the current government in charge of pensions is doing. And I would hope that is a case Michelle Ballantyne will make forcibly to her colleagues at Westminster.
Question number 6, Neil Findlay.
To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government has taken following the recent meeting between the Health Secretary and mesh survivors.
First Minister.
Last week, the Health Secretary and the Chief Medical Officer met with mesh campaigners and Neil Findlay to discuss their concerns over access to specialist services for mesh removal. As the Health Secretary set out in an answer on Friday, we're listening carefully to those concerns. We've asked a group of senior medical managers to look at a range of options to see how the care and support for these women can be improved, drawing on international expertise in transvaginal mesh surgery. The group will draw on academics and other advisors as well as advocates for the women who have been affected. The first meeting of the group will be held as soon as possible, and Jane Freeman has committed to writing to the campaigners within 1 month to set out the probable timescales for this work.
Thank
the First Minister for that answer. At the meeting, Scottish mesh survivors made a very emotional appeal for the Government to take up the offer to bring top US surgeon to Scotland to carry out pioneering mesh removal and train surgeons here. On Friday, the Government issued an ambiguous press release that hinted at progress but lacked any clarity. So can I seek a clear and straightforward answer on their behalf? When will Scottish mesh survivors have access to the highest global standard of mesh removal procedures? And will the Scottish Government now accept the offer from Dr Veronicas to come to Scotland to help mesh-injured women here?
First Minister.
Well, Neil Findlay raises an important issue. Jean Freeman listened carefully to those that she met on Friday and has done since then everything that she told the campaigners that she would do. Specifically, as I said in my original answer, she has asked a group of medical directors and senior clinical managers to look at a range of options to improve care and support, and that is the right way forward. In terms of the answer to the question, when will there be more detail, she will write to campaigners within a month, setting out the next steps in this work. That is the proper way to take this forward. In terms of removal of mesh, decisions to remove mesh would be made by a patient in consultation with a clinical specialist who will share all relevant information and provide support. So there is a real commitment to taking forward the proposals that were made on Friday, but to doing that in a proper way. And I hope we will have Neil Findlay's support as we do so.
Question number 7, John Finney.
Presiding Officer, to ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking in response to the reported increasing number of drugs deaths.
First Minister.
Our National Alcohol and Drug Strategy, which was published last November, set out a range of measures to prevent drug-related harm. The strategy's focus is on improving how we support those who need it and treat the wider issues affecting them. It outlines how we will work with and fund partners to strengthen links between traditional addiction services and initiatives in housing, mental health and the third sector. This is backed with an additional £20 million a year for drug and alcohol services. The investment has been allocated to support new approaches that respond to the needs of those who are most at risk in a more joined-up and person-centred way.
John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank the First Minister for that approach, for that response. The current approach clearly isn't working, First Minister. There were 934 deaths in 2017, and sadly, everything suggests the figure for 2018 may be significantly higher. First Minister, we're faced with a public health crisis. Scottish ministers have the power to establish a public inquiry into any matter when there is a large loss of life and/or serious health and safety issues. And this situation clearly meets both these criteria. Will the First Minister urgently establish a statutory inquiry into Scotland's drug death crisis and commit to acting on its findings in order to ending this ongoing tragedy?
First Minister.
I absolutely agree with the seriousness of this issue. I'm not immediately persuaded that would be the best way forward, but of course we will consider any proposal that has been made. Any death from drugs is one too many. Of course, many of the people we sadly see dying from drugs are people who have lived with alcohol and drug use for a long time and become more vulnerable as they grow older. The 2018 drug death report showed fewer deaths in under 25s than in the previous year, and of course recent reports also highlight falling heroin use, particularly in the under 25 age group. So there is absolutely no room there for complacency, but I think it is an important contextual point to make. We want to look at different ways of addressing these issues. That's why, for example, we have supported Glasgow City Council in its request to set up medically supervised safer drug consumption facilities. We want to treat these issues much more as public health issues, bringing different agencies together. And as we do that, we are, of course, prepared to consider any proposal that is made, and I will do that with the one that John Finney has made today.
Thank you. That brings us to an end of First Minister's questions. Could you say to colleagues that First Minister's questions, we're going to move. Rather unfortunate pun, I think.
Options. First, if the House has approved a meaningful vote by the 20th of March and agreed a timetable for the EU Withdrawal Agreement Bill, we can expect the European Union to agree to a short technical extension to allow the necessary legislation to be carried through. If that proves, for whatever reason, not to be possible, we would be faced with the prospect of choosing only a long extension, during which the House would need to face up to the choices in front of it and the consequences of the decisions that it has taken. But the Government recognises that the House will require time to consider the potential ways forward in such a scenario. So I can confirm today that in such a scenario, the government, having consulted the usual channels at that time, would facilitate a process in the 2 weeks after the March European Council to allow the House to seek a majority on the way forward. But we should be clear about the consequences if that were to happen. If we are in the world of a longer extension for this House to come to a decision, then we will be required, as a condition, to hold European parliamentary elections in May. And as the note published on this issue by the government today sets out, we would need to begin preparing for those in early April. In other words, we either deliver on the result of the referendum, giving people and businesses across the country the certainty they are calling for, and move on as a nation, or we enter into a sustained period of uncertainty, during which time the government would work with this House to find a way through, but which I fear would do real damage to the public's faith in politics and trust in our democracy. I will give way.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. In relation to the possibility of having to conduct European elections if the extension went past May 23rd, can you tell the House, is the Cabinet Office prepared for that? On what date would such elections take place, and how much would it cost?
I don't have the figures on cost to hand, and those I think would be a matter of record that the Electoral Commission would have available on its website. But we would have to